All right, here we go. And here people come. All right, so we talked about some concepts in our first study of Shalach on Friday that dealt with, on Shabbat, that dealt with being aware of the presence of Elohim. And a comment that was made that really didn't hit me until afterwards was that the difference between praying to a deity and having a conversation with a presence. Okay? And hold that thought, because we'll come back to that as we get down towards the middle. And this is also where we'll take a look at religion as opposed to reality. Okay? Because it isn't about religion. It's, well, if we go by the definition of religion, that simply means a system of belief. Well, we all have systems of belief. Okay? But when we look at religion, we tend to associate it with, Christianity or Judaism or Hinduism or Buddhism or some kind of ism. So let's talk to our Elohim, and we'll take a look at Parsha Shalach Part 2. Father, we thank you for this time together. We ask that you will open our eyes, open our ears, and open our hearts, so we can hear, see, and understand what your word tells us. And we thank you in the name of Yahusha. Amen. All right, so we're going to be looking at Shemot 15:22 through 27. They've left Egypt. They've been at the Reed Sea. They've escaped Pharaoh by crossing through the midst of the waters. They come to the other side. They're singing a song, and they're dancing, and it says that Miriam is playing her timbrels, and they're all rejoicing because the chariot and the rider and all this have been thrown into the sea. But then they move on. Okay? So verse 22 says, "And Moses led Israel onward from the Reed Sea, and they went out into the wilderness of Shur, and they went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water." Okay. Well, great. They're going out into the desert. So we can say that from a historical point of view, they've left Egypt, they've escaped Pharaoh, they're moving out into the midst of the desert, and there's no water to be found. What does it mean? If it's called Torah, then we have to have some semblance of application. We have to look at it and understand, how do I apply this to my life? So let's take a look at it. First of all, we have to take the phrase, "and Moses led Israel onward from the Reed Sea," very seriously. Moses. Consider Moses to be a representation of our spiritual connection. Okay? It is the thing that we all hold inside, the spirit that connects us to our Elohim. Okay? So, representation of our spiritual connection to our Elohim that draws upon the word of Yahuwah for instruction and guidance. When we rely on this state of connection, we are Israel. We are the Prince of Elohim, and in this state of connection, we move onward from the word vayatzu, that from the root yatsa means to move both forwards and backwards. All right? So we can consider this as kind of an important concept to move forwards and backwards. We have to know when to advance, but we also need to know when it's in our best interest to withdraw. But we also need to keep in mind that we can go backwards sometimes into something that we don't need to be going backwards into. So we can further consider this in the word used for led, which in this case is vayasa, that means to begin a journey. So every day that we're alive is the beginning of a new journey. And every day we choose to move forwards or to move backwards. It's in this that we can move forward into the wilderness of opportunity and transition, or backwards into the bondage of the Reed Sea in Egypt. So if we're moving forward into the wilderness, we have to be prepared to encounter obstacles. And we find this in the name Shur, that means a wall. So here we have a paradox. We have the idea of moving forward, but the idea of moving forward into a wall. All right. So let's take a look. We have sure that as a paradox, it comes from a similar root that means to journey. Okay, so the idea is to keep going even though there's a wall that might be there. So to understand how we journey beyond the wall of whatever holds us back, we have to take into account the word for wilderness, which in this case is midbar. It's the root of this word that we have to consider, because this is going to tell us how to overcome the walls. The root of this word is dabar, that means to speak, and it is in the words that we speak or in the words that we think. Okay? I don't necessarily have to speak out loud how I'm thinking. Okay? It communicates to my Elohim either way. If I have doubt, that communicates to my Elohim just the same as I were speaking it. So it's the words that we speak or the words that we think that declare another meaning of dabar, whether we move forward through the obstacle or remain stuck, frozen, or still in our journey forwards. So dabar means to speak, to think, to declare, but it also means to become stuck. All right? What we have to take seriously into consideration is found in the phrase, "And they went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water," no water, which begins with the word vayalechu, used to say "and went." Now the root of this word is Shalach, that means to walk, but it's also a word that refers to a way of life. And this is where we come up with the word halacha, which we've taken halacha to an extreme in the Talmud. The interpretations of the Torah and the interpretations of how to do this and how to do that have been taken to an extreme beyond what the Torah mandates that be done. For example, the Shulchan Aruch, we've talked about it a time before, it tells us how to dress, tells us that when you get up in the morning, you put on your right shoe, then put on your left shoe, then tie your laces on your right shoe, then tie your laces on your left shoe. It caused such a quandary that the people in the district next to them that didn't have shoelaces said, "Well, what do? We don't know how to, They said, no, you put on your right shoe first, and you put on your left shoe, and you're good to go. But halacha, as a word, simply means a way of life. How do we live? And if we say that we are Torah observant, we can ask, what does that mean? Do I understand what it actually says in the Torah that I should and should not do? Or am I getting my idea or my interpretation from a doctrine from the church or a ruling from the rabbis? Okay? So, the phrase, 3 days in the wilderness, gives us a choice. The idea is found in 3. The third letter of the alphabet is Gimel, that can mean a dependence on the stability and the wealth that comes from the Spirit of Yahuwah, or a dependence on ourselves that comes from pride and arrogance. Okay? So 3 is an idea of wealth. Gimel means camel, and a camel is what carried great loads of wealth and things, but it's also shaped like something that is stable with 2 feet on the ground holding something else up. So what holds us up? Is it our relationship with our Elohim, or is it pride and arrogance? The last phrase of this verse, we're going to consider what happens when we pursue the latter of these 2 choices. In other words, what happens when we pursue the dependence on ourselves that comes from pride and arrogance? They found no water, is where we come up with. So we can consider that it's pride that keeps us from taking a Shabbat. I'm not talking about the 7th-day Shabbat. I'm talking about the word Shabbat that means to stop. We take a Shabbat, a time to enter into the Word of Yahuwah to refresh our being, and a time to sit and have a conversation with Yahuwah, our Elohim. Do we take the time to stop and have a conversation with a presence? And this is where this big difference, we have to realize this. It's the difference between praying to a deity. I believe in some little old man with a nice beard floating around in a throne in some place called heaven, and I'm praying to a little old man. Or am I aware of a presence that is here in the room with me, that I can sit down and have a cup of tea and have a conversation with, and have my pen and my paper ready to jot down the notes from the thoughts that come into my head during this conversation? In other words, is Yahuwah Elohim a deity to you? Or is Yahuwah Elohim a real presence in your life? And that is something that we have to come to grips with. And that's where it becomes the difference from between, is it a religion? Do I hold to the tenets of this religion or that religion? Or am I holding on to the elements that are necessary for this relationship as found in the instruction book that tells us how to have this relationship? And in that case, am I holding on to religion, or am I living halacha? Am I living a way of life that is in alignment with the word of Yahuwah Elohim? We consider the Shema, that last part of the Shema. Yahuwah is Echad. We have to consider Echad. The numerical value, the gematria of the word Echad is 13. We think the 13th letter of the Aleph Beit is Mem, that represents the word. Then Echad also means to be in agreement with. Yahuwah is in agreement with his word. I have to ask myself, am I in agreement with that word as well? And if so, then we are also Echad, that means to be in unity. All right? So there's a difference between praying to a deity, which is kind of a fantasy idea, a Greco-Roman idea. You have a lot of deities that you pray to. Or having a relationship with something that is real and present, that we've come to know as Yahuwah Elohim. Okay? When I say real and present, I say he, because our brains are wired to humanize things. If I said it, people would be scandalized. If I say he, it's how I can understand it. It'd probably be better to say she, because Yahuwah is a feminine name, and Elohim is a feminine plural. But as such, if it's a feminine anything, it represents being a spiritual aspect. Okay? But if I believe that he is present, he's present just like you are present, and we're having this, I'm talking to you right now because I can see all of you. Do I have the same awareness of the presence of Yahuwah Elohim when I'm sitting down to have a conversation? And this is where we need to really, really focus on the difference between praying to a deity and having a conversation with Elohim, a presence of a mighty force that is there with us in every aspect of our lives, at every moment of our lives. Anyway, so we have to be able to understand where we are in our way of life. But they found no water. Pride keeps us from taking the Shabbat to step into that relationship with our Elohim, to refresh our being, and the time to sit down with a conversation. So we become devoid of water when we don't take the time to stop and drink from the source of our own existence. The result is verse 23. It says, and they came to Marah. They could not drink the waters of Marah, for they were bitter. Therefore the name of it was called Marah. So in the simplest terms, we encounter bitterness. Marah. Marah means bitterness. And it is this bitterness that we find harmful to existence. The irony is that we create what we're not willing to drink. I create the situation that makes me bitter, and then I'm not happy in the bitterness that I'm in, because I don't take the time to stop and drink from water that's good. I don't take the time to have a Shabbat and have a conversation with my Elohim and be in unity and be echad, okay? Which involves me opening the Torah and reading it, finding the Pastor Spoon while I'm there, right? Okay. So we quickly develop a darkened outlook and perception of everything. The result of that is found in verse 24. And the people murmured against Moses, saying, "What shall we drink?" So the first thing that suffers is the spirit. The spirit gets attacked. Okay? Our spiritual being gets attacked because we don't like the bitterness. We don't want to drink the bitterness, but we don't want to let go of the pride and the arrogance that allows us to realize that we're a spiritual being that is devoid of the company of Elohim that we need. Okay? So first, we have to consider the word for people, which is ha'am. In the ayin, we can consider the idea of perception, as ayin is the Hebrew word for eye. The root of the word am, meaning people, is amam, that means dark or dim. So here we can consider that bitterness causes a dark or dim perception, and if we take into account the letters He and the letters Mem in the word Ha'am, we can consider too that we develop a dark or dim perception of both the word of Yahuwah and the spirit of Yahuwah, both of which are capable of bringing the manifestation of the very things that we need to overcome the bitterness of what we've allowed to grow. If we look at Proverbs, I always get it messed up, so forgive me, 8 in the 30s, it talks about wisdom is talking. Wisdom says, I was there in the beginning, and wisdom says, I helped create. The word and the wisdom were there in the beginning. The word was the wisdom, but the word and the wisdom of Elohim help to create within us the manifestations that we need to get us out of the bitterness. But if we won't take the time to have a relationship with our Elohim, then we stay focused in our bitterness and we stay in our dark or dim perception. So, here we lack understanding and murmur from the word bayilonu, that means to take lodging, specifically at night. In other words, we choose to remain in the darkness asking, what shall we drink? Sitting there in the dark, I have a dark or dim perception. I'm not drinking the water of my bitterness. I'm not taking my situation very well. I'm the one that's got me there. And I'm complaining because I'm thirsty. Because I don't take the time to recognize that there's something beyond me that can help me out of it. I can pray to a deity, but that's really not going to do anything for me. Or I can have a conversation with a presence of the most powerful entity in existence and beyond that can open my eyes, bring light into my eyes, and help me to see what direction I need to walk. So, as we often do, we seek every remedy we can think of except the one that will work, which is teshuvah. The first step towards restoration is to stop. Take a personal Shabbat and then follow the instructions as found in verse 25. And he cried out to Yahuwah, and Yahuwah showed him a tree, and he cast it into the waters, and the waters were made sweet. There he made for them a statute and an ordinance, and there he proved them. So the first step is recognizing that Yahuwah our Elohim is present, and then be willing to become humble in his presence. The verse begins with the word Vayitzak. Okay? Yitzhak, Yitzhak as a name. You know, we know Yitzhak, Isaac, means Elohim has become my help. But here we have Vayitzak, that aside from the idea of simply crying out, also means to call out for help. The verse says that he cried to Yahuwah. Moses, our spiritual connection, overrides the physical barrier of the flesh and seeks the help of Elohim. What does 2 Chronicles 7, around 12ish say, if my people who will call upon my name will humble themselves and seek me and repent of what they're doing, I will hear them and I will forgive them and I will heal their land. Okay? The first step is to recognize that Yahuwah Elohim is present, that he's real. The second step is to humble myself. I have to let go of the arrogance and pride. The third step is I have to begin to make that spiritual connection and have that conversation. So this can only be done in a state of humility when the flesh becomes subservient to the spirit. Only then can we consider the phrase, and Yahuwah showed him a tree. So this phrase begins with the word al, that means regarding and considering, but it's also used to denote the action of moving towards something. So from this we can consider that the second step after becoming humble is to consider and regard Yahuwah and to begin moving towards him. Okay? I'm not praying to a deity. I'm not depending on some little man sitting on a throne floating around. I am moving towards a real presence that is active in my life. Here, the Ruach HaKodesh, the Spirit of Yahuwah, that came for the specific reason of interacting with humankind. Okay? So from this we can consider that the second step after becoming humble is to consider and regard Yahuwah and begin moving towards him. The word for showed, okay, here's one that we kind of get into trouble if we depend on our English or Afrikaans or Japanese or whatever translation. The word for showed has nothing to do with showing. The word is vayurechu, that from the root yara means to shoot, as well as to teach, to instruct, and to direct. Okay? So I guess in a way it shows, but more specifically, to teach, to direct, to instruct. This word yara is also the root of the word Torah. So what we consider is that Yahuwah does not show us a tree. He instructs us, teaches us, and directs us according to the Torah, also considered to be the tree of life. This is where we look at some of those stories in the Midrash. I can say stories in the Midrash. I have to say events in the Torah, but I can say stories in the Midrash. Okay? The rabbis say that the tree that he actually throws into the water is the tree of life. How he gets it out of Eden, I don't know. But let's consider that for a minute. Okay? He says he yara the tree. Okay? He directed, he taught, he instructed according to the tree. So if we consider the idea of the tree as being the Torah, the word of Elohim, when we throw that into the water, what happens to the water? The Midrash suggests that the tree in this event is the tree of life. Great. And it's a representation of the word of Yahuwah. What we can consider is that when our spirit becomes aware of the presence of Yahuwah because the flesh is in submission, we are refreshed by the teaching and the instruction as found in the word of Yahuwah. We cast it into the waters of our own bitterness and become refreshed. Thus, the verse says, the waters became sweet. It's by the statutes and the ordinances of the Torah that we are proven true or not in our relationship with Yahuwah Elohim. Say that again. It's by the statutes and the ordinance of the Torah that we are proven true or not in a relationship with our Elohim. We have a lot of statutes and ordinances within the Torah that maybe don't make sense to us. One of the ones that I like to use more than anything else because it really, really sheds a lot of light to me as to why these statutes are so important is the idea of not eating the pulled pork sandwich. I've shared it with you a number of times, but again, you shall not eat the swine because it is unclean to you. So, okay, well, no more BLTs. But the word for swine is chazir, and this is how we find our way. We have to understand the language it's written in. Chazir really doesn't mean pig. It means to enclose, to encapsulate something. Don't eat things that encapsulate tameh, a lack of morals, a lack of ethics, or things that are not true. One of the statutes, don't consume things that are not ethical, moral, or don't consume lies. Okay? Goes well beyond not eating the pulled pork sandwich. I won't eat the pulled pork sandwich because topically I want to be obedient to the Torah. But I have to understand a little bit deeper than that. And this is one of those things that when we start to connect to our Elohim and start to read it in his language and understand what he's telling us, the Torah becomes a very important teacher, gives us direction, guides us according to its statutes and ordinances, and it's those statutes and ordinances that prove us, either show us to be walking correctly or incorrectly. Who's responsible for that? Well, naturally, it's going to be the pastor, the rabbi that leads the congregation, right? No. We'll get to that in just a second. Remind me if I forget to bring that up again. Okay? All right. So by the statutes and the ordinance of the Torah we're proven true or not in our relationship with Yahweh Elohim. As we read in verse 26, the only way to truly escape from the bondage of Mitzrayim, the things that have us under siege, is to reside in the word and the presence of Yahweh Elohim. Verse 26, and he said, if you will diligently hearken, in other words, if you will shema, if you will perceive, discern, understand, obey, apply, and be content with what the voice of Yahuwah Elohecha, remember that, Elohecha, and will do which is right in his eyes, and will give ear to his commandments, and keep, shamar, and treasure. Imagine that. We have this book. It has all the statutes of our Elohim in the first 5 books. It has a whole bunch of application and how to not totally and completely screw it up, given to us by 12 minor prophets and 3 major prophets, and a couple of oddball prophets that are not really even prophets. And then we have our master who comes and expounds on it and explains it to us and shows us physically how to live according to it. We have this book that we should shamar, treasure, guard, preserve. That's what shamar means. Okay? Keep, shamar, treasure, guard, preserve, and observe all of his statutes. I will put none of the diseases upon you which I have put on the Egyptians, for I am Yahuwah that helps you. What diseases did he put on the Egyptians? If I'm in bondage, then I am first and foremost in a lack of belief, water to blood. Then I have doubt. I have frogs in my life. Then I make mountains out of molehills. I have the little gnats, the kanim, that latch on and bite, that the root of the word kanim, and I'm still trying to figure out how they got this, means the root of a giant tree. That's all right. We'll figure it out someday. Then we have the confusion, the swarm. Torah doesn't say anything about flies. Doesn't say anything about wild beasts. Simply says swarm, from a word that means confusion. But the diseases that are brought upon the Egyptians, if I will shema and shamar what the Torah says, if I will pay attention to it, understand it, apply it to my life, and be content in what it says, and then treasure it, make it something special in my life, then I escape these things that the Egyptians suffered through. I cease to be an Egyptian, someone who's in bondage, and I move on. So we can consider here in this verse, by the use of the word Elohecha, that it is a personal and intimate choice we must make as individuals. Therefore, the pastor, the preacher, the teacher, the candlestick maker have nothing to do with any of it. They can bump their gums, but not everything that I say to you is going to be accurate. And I will tell you that every time. Go back and look at what I've said. Ultimately, you are responsible for your relationship with Yahweh Elohim. The person that's teaching you, the pastor, the rabbi, they cannot have a relationship for you. Does that make sense? Hopefully. Okay, so a relationship with Yahuwah is a personal choice that can